So today we're looking at a reality that honestly it completely shatters one of the most fundamental assumptions we have about how the world works.
Oh, absolutely.
And you know the assumption I'm talking about. It's the one we're all taught in history class, in economics, and just in everyday life, really. The idea that hard work equals wealth.
Right. The basic equation of capitalism,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Yeah.
We assume that if you have a society where everyone is working, where the labor participation rate is just through the roof, that country's economic engine is firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, you put more people to work, you generate more wealth, and living standards inevitably go up. It's treated like a law of gravity in economics.
It really is. It's the traditional input-output model. High labor participation is supposed to be this ultimate indicator of a healthy, upwardly mobile society.
Right. If the people are working, the country is growing. That's the textbook theory anyway.
Right. But we are going to look at a country today that breaks that rule in a spectacular, an almost heartbreaking way.
It really is.
I want you to imagine a nation where the female labor participation rate is just staggering. We're talking about 76.5%.
Which is huge.
It is. And to put that into perspective for you, the global average for female labor participation, it hovers right around 46.47%.
So it's an incredibly high baseline of sheer human effort. You're looking at a society where the vast majority of women are actively engaged in daily, strenuous economic activity.
Exactly. So you see a number like 76.5%, and your brain just naturally fills in the blanks, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would expect this country to be an absolute powerhouse. You'd expect immense national wealth, bustling formal markets, high living standards, and a robust middle class driven by this incredible work ethic.
You would. That's the logical leap.
Yeah. Yet the country we're looking at today, Mozambique, ranks near the very bottom of the Global Human Development Index. Out of all the nations measured across the globe, it sits at 182nd place.
It really is one of the most striking paradoxes in global development data.
A total paradox.
Yeah. You have one of the highest rates of female labor participation on the planet, basically coexisting with one of the lowest levels of measurable human development. It completely defies the standard logic of global economics.
It's a profound paradox of hard work.
Right.
And that brings us to our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We are looking at a really comprehensive sweep of data, a report covering 1990 all the way to 2023. It's tracking Mozambique's human development, gender equality, multidimensional poverty, and even their environmental footprint.
That's a massive data set.
It is. And our goal is to answer one critical question for you today. Why is this incredible, undeniable work ethic trapped in a cycle of high input and low output?
Mm-hmm.
What are the unseen systemic hurdles that are actively blocking all of that sweat and effort from actually turning into prosperity?
And to answer that, we really have to synthesize this quantitative research. We're going to look at the raw Human Development Index, sure, but we also have to layer that with gender inequality metrics, multidimensional poverty realities, and planetary pressures.
Right, getting the whole picture.
Exactly, because by cross-referencing these different lenses, we can see exactly where all this human effort is going, and more importantly, the exact mechanisms within the system that are failing to capture and reward that effort.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can solve the mystery of why all this labor isn't translating into wealth, we need to establish exactly where Mozambique stands on the global stage today.
We do. Context is everything here.
And honestly, we need to understand how far they've had to climb just to get to this seemingly low point.
Yeah, if we just look at a snapshot of the year 2023, the contrasts are stark and, frankly, quite grim. Mozambique's current Human Development Index value is 0.493.
And for anyone who might not, look at HDI scores every single day, let's ground that concept for a second. The Human Development Index isn't just about GDP or money in the bank.
No, not at all.
It's a composite score. It combines life expectancy, access to education, and a decent standard of living into a single number between 0 and 1. So it's really a measurement of a society's overall well-being.
Precisely. It's basically asking, how long will you live, how much will you learn, and how well will you live?
Right?
So Mozambique sits at a combined score of 0.493, but the global average HDI in 2023 is big 0.756.
Wow.
Yeah, that represents a nearly 35% gap between Mozambique and the rest of the world.
A 35% deficit in the basic fundamentals of human well-being. It sounds incredibly discouraging.
It does.
When you hear a number like that, the instinct is to assume the system is just entirely broken or stagnant.
Yeah.
But there is a massive historical reality we have to acknowledge here to understand the trajectory.
We absolutely must, because if you rewind the clock and look at the data from 1990, Mozambique's HDI was a mere 0.246.
0.246. I want to just pause on that because a number that low
Yeah,
is almost hard to conceptualize in a modern context.
it is.
That implies a society where basic survival is an everyday crisis, where schools are virtually non-existent for the majority, and where the economic baseline is just absolute grinding poverty.
It reflects a period of extreme systemic deprivation, yes, but it also means that from 1990 to 2023, Mozambique's Human Development Index grew by an incredible 100.4%.
That's huge.
They literally doubled their overall human development over 3 decades.
Doubling your national human development in 30 years. I mean, that is a monumental achievement. And the data shows this incredible rapid growth period right after the year 2000. It's this steep upward curve of progress. But then as we track it toward the present day, there's a very noticeable slowdown. The momentum starts to really drag after 2019.
Yes, the momentum stalls significantly, and this is where the sober reality of global inequality hits hard. Doubling your HDI is a triumph of policy and human resilience, absolutely.
Right.
But because their starting point in 1990 was so incredibly low, that 100% improvement only gets them to 0.493 today.
Which is still so far behind.
Exactly. What's fascinating and tough to swallow is that the global average HDI back in 1990, 30 years ago, was already 0.60.
Oh, wow. Okay, so think about it like this. Imagine you're running a marathon, right?
Okay.
You've just sprinted your fastest, most grueling mile ever. You've put in maximum physical effort, you broke your personal record,
Yeah.
and you are exhausted but proud.
Right.
But then you look up and you realize you started the race 10 miles behind the starting line. Even running at your absolute limit, literally doubling your speed, you are still trying to catch up to where the rest of the pack was 30 years ago.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The absolute distance they've covered is vast, and we really shouldn't diminish that. But the relative remaining gap between them and global prosperity is still a massive chasm.
But looking at this data, I have to push back a little on the timeline. We see this distinct slowdown post-2019. Now, every country on Earth took a massive hit during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Of course.
Supply chains broke, schools closed, healthcare systems were overwhelmed. Is this stall just a pandemic hangover? Or are we seeing something more fundamental? Are we seeing the signs of an exhausted growth model where they've picked all the low-hanging fruit of development?
The data suggests it's a complex combination of both, but it's leaning heavily toward an exhausted model.
Really?
Yeah. The pandemic undoubtedly caused a severe contraction. We see dips across almost all indicators globally during 2020 and 2021. However, when we look deeper into the structural barriers within Mozambique's data, it becomes clear that their specific model of early-stage growth is hitting a systemic ceiling.
What do you mean by early-stage growth?
Well, you can only improve so much on basic survival metrics like basic sanitation or rudimentary caloric intake before you need sophisticated institutional infrastructure to keep growing.
Oh, I see.
Going from 0 schools to some schools gives you a massive statistical bump. But going from basic primary schools to advanced secondary education that produces specialized labor, that requires a completely different level of investment in structural integrity.
Okay, speaking of those basic survival metrics, let's look at the biggest victory in this data set. Because if you literally double your HDI, something profound and tangible had to happen on the ground. And the data points directly to human health and survival. This is an absolute silent triumph that I think often gets lost in economic discussions.
It truly is the foundation of all their progress. When we dive into the life expectancy data, the numbers they're deeply moving. In 1990, the life expectancy at birth in Mozambique was just 44.3 years.
Let that sink in for a second for everyone listening. 44.3 years. Imagine living in a society where, on average, a life is considered fully lived and concluded in the early 40s.
It's heartbreaking.
The psychological, emotional, and societal impact of that kind of mortality is just hard to fathom. Your parents are gone before you are truly established. You might not live to see your children become adults.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes how a society operates. But by 2023, we see a massive transformative leap. Life expectancy for women in Mozambique reached 66.5 years.
Wow.
And for men, it reached 60.3 years.
That is a near 20-year jump in life expectancy across 3 decades.
Adding 2 decades of life expectancy to a population in just over 30 years is a miraculous demographic shift. It changes the entire fabric of a nation.
It really does.
It's the result of massive public health campaigns, better basic sanitation, vaccinations, and maternal care improvements.
I really want you, the listener, to how entirely different a society's planning, its family structure, and its economy look when the average person suddenly has 20 extra years of life.
It's a paradigm shift.
Right. Think about the mechanics of that. You can suddenly have grandparents who survive long enough to help raise grandchildren, which frees up the parents to work more consistently. You have elders who can pass down generational knowledge, whether that's farming techniques, cultural history, or skilled trades. You have 20 more years of productive, experienced labor per person. It completely rereads the social contract.
What's fascinating here is how the data shows the sheer resilience of this progress. If we look closely at the years 2020 and 2021, life expectancy did dip.
Because of COVID, right?
Yes. Women dropped to about 63.1 years and men to 57.1 years, which is the undeniable footprint of the pandemic. But by 2022, it almost immediately rebounded.
Really? That fast?
Yeah, women shot back up to 65.8 and men to almost 59.8, continuing to rise right into 2023.
That is genuinely surprising. You would expect a fragile healthcare system to completely collapse and take, I don't know, a decade to recover.
Right, but it shows a societal resilience that can take a massive global shock and recover its hard-won gains almost immediately. It suggests that the health interventions they've put in place, while basic, are deeply rooted and durable.
That is incredible. But as with everything we are uncovering in this data stack, there is a very sobering reality check attached to it.
Yes, there always is in these reports. Because despite this massive 20-year leap, Mozambican men are currently living to 60.3 years, while the global male average is 71.0 years.
Right.
And Mozambican women at 66.5 years are still nearly a decade behind the global female average of 75.8 years. The historical gap has narrowed beautifully, but a decade of human life is still a tragic disparity.
It's a tremendous victory, but the finish line just keeps moving further away.
Exactly.
Now, this brings us to a really fascinating pivot point in our deep dive. If people are living longer, if they suddenly have these extra 20 years of life, are they spending those formative early years gaining skills?
That's the big question.
Right. Are they using that extra time to build specialized human capital that can drive an economy forward? Because this leads us to what the data reveals as the single biggest bottleneck in the entire country's progress.
The data on education is basically the skeleton key here. It's where we start to see exactly why that 76.5% labor participation rate we talked about isn't generating wealth.
Okay, let's get into it.
To understand this, we have to look at two specific, highly revealing metrics: expected years of schooling and mean years of schooling.
Let's define those really clearly, because the difference between them is the whole story. Expected years of schooling is basically a measure of opportunity, right?
Right.
It's asking how many years of school can a young child entering the education system today expect to receive if current enrollment trends and infrastructure hold steady.
Correct. It's a forward-looking measure of the system's capacity and the opportunity theoretically available to the current generation. And in 2023, Mozambique's expected years of schooling is actually quite solid, 10.8 years.
So on paper, the system has the physical capacity to keep a child in a classroom for over a decade. They've built the schools, they have hired the teachers for those early grades. That sounds like a massive policy win.
It is a profound win for access. It means the physical infrastructure exists and children are initially getting through the door.
Okay.
But then we look at the mean years of schooling. This is the retrospective metric. This is the actual realized average years of education achieved by adults who are currently out there in the society driving the economy.
A reality check.
Exactly. And the mean years of schooling for adults in Mozambique is a mere 4.59 years.
Wow.
For context, the global average is 8.7 years.
Let's break down the math on that, because it is just devastating. You have an expected rate of 10.8 years, but an actual reality of 4.59 years.
Yeah.
That is a 6.2-year gap. That isn't just a slight statistical discrepancy or a margin of error. That is a massive systemic collapse of potential.
It fundamentally reframes the nature of the problem. For decades, global aid focused on building primary schools, right?
Right.
But the crisis in Mozambique is no longer about getting kids into a classroom on day one. Access has vastly improved. The real urgent crisis is retention. The system cannot keep them in the classroom.
I always try to picture this physically. It's not a leaky bucket. A leaky bucket implies a slow drip. This is more like a glass bridge.
A glass bridge.
Yeah. The first few steps, grades 1, 2, and 3, are solid. The kids are walking across.
Yeah.
But right around grade 4 or 5, the economic and social pressures become too heavy, the glass shatters beneath them, and they fall right out of the formal education system and straight into the informal labor pool.
That's a very accurate visualization.
But here's what I don't understand, and I want to challenge this. If the government has built the schools and basic education is available, why are they leaving?
It's a good question.
Are the parents just choosing not to send them? Is the curriculum that bad? What specific mechanism is pulling a 10-year-old out of a free classroom?
To answer that, you have to look outside the classroom. The forces shattering that glass bridge are not educational forces. They are deeply rooted in sheer economic survival and profound structural inequality.
Okay.
You have to ask yourself, what is the opportunity cost for a desperately poor family to leave a 10-year-old child in a classroom for 6 hours a day?
Meaning, if that child is sitting at a desk, they aren't out fetching water or tending crops or watching younger siblings so the parents can work.
Precisely. In a subsistence economy, a 10-year-old is a vital economic asset. Keeping them in school is a luxury many families physically cannot afford.
That's brutal.
It is. Which brings us to the economic baseline of the entire country. Because leaving school at age 10 with barely basic literacy and numeracy directly translates to a lifelong lack of earning power.
Right. If you only have 4.5 years of education, you aren't going to be hired as a software engineer or a bank manager. You are permanently locked out of the high-yield modern economy.
Exactly.
Let's look at exactly what that translates to in dollars and cents.
We measure this through the gross national income, or GNI, per capita, and we adjust it for purchasing power parity so we can compare it globally.
Right, apples to apples.
Exactly. In 2023, Mozambique's GNI per capita is extremely fragile, $1,356.
$1,356 for an entire year. That's roughly 3.78 a day. Try to imagine navigating life buying food, clothing, medicine, shelter on less than $4 a day.
It's almost unimaginable for most in the developed world.
It means every single day is a tightrope walk of survival.
And compare that to the global average GNI per capita, which is $20,327. Mozambique is operating with a 93.3% income gap compared to the rest of the world.
93.3%.
Yes. The national income base is so incredibly low that it severely limits the state's ability to tax, to build advanced infrastructure, or to invest back into fixing that shattered glass bridge of an education system.
And when you zoom in on how that $1,356 is split between men and women, the data gets even more complex and, honestly, quite counterintuitive.
It does. In 2023, Mozambican men earn an estimated $1,523 annually, while women earn $11,198.
So a Mozambican woman is living on roughly $11,198 a year. Let's compare that globally. The global female average is $14,943. That means a Mozambican woman's income is only 8% of what the average woman globally makes. Just 8%.
It is a staggering level of absolute economic deprivation. But this is where the data presents a fascinating statistical illusion.
Okay, an illusion.
Yes. We look at a metric called the Gender Development Index, or GDI. This index simply measures the ratio of female human development to male human development within a single country.
Okay.
It asks how close are women to men in terms of basic health, education, and income.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You look at Mozambique's GDI score for 2023, and it is 0.920. In the global ranking system, this actually places them in Group 4, ranking 154th.
Right.
A ratio of 0.920 means women are at 92% of the development level of men. Now, on paper, to a casual observer, that looks surprisingly balanced.
It really does.
You see 92% and you think, wow, they have almost closed the gender gap. They must be incredibly progressive.
It is a total statistical mirage. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to deeply understand what that 0.920 actually represents in reality.
Right.
Sociologists and economists refer to this phenomenon as equal poverty.
Equal poverty.
Yes. The ratio between men and women is close 0.920 only because the absolute development values for both genders are incredibly low.
Wait, so they aren't equally wealthy and thriving. They are just equally destitute.
Precisely. True gender equality in high development nations means equal access to abundant resources, advanced university education, and high-paying formal careers. In Mozambique, a GDI of 0.920 currently means that men and women are almost equally deprived of those resources. A man with 5 years of schooling and a woman with 4 years of schooling are statistically very close to each other, creating a high equality ratio.
But in reality,
In reality, they are both living in extreme educational poverty.
that is such a vital distinction.
Mhm.
Equal poverty is not equality of opportunity, it's just shared suffering.
Exactly.
But if they're fundamentally equally poor on paper, what unique structural barriers are women facing that prevent them from breaking this cycle? Because we know women face entirely different biological, cultural, and societal hurdles than men do, especially in developing economies.
And the data set captures those hurdles perfectly through a different lens, the Gender Inequality Index, or GII.
Okay, how is that different from GDI?
Well, the GII doesn't just look at basic human development. It specifically measures reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market. Mozambique's GII value is 0.479, ranking them 126 globally. But the real story isn't the final score. It's in the specific pain points hidden within this index.
Yeah, the health metrics in this section are just devastating to read.
They are. The maternal mortality ratio in Mozambique is exceptionally high at 127.1 deaths per 100,000 live births.
That's terrifying.
It is a direct reflection of a healthcare system that cannot protect women during their most vulnerable physical moments. But even more alarming for the long-term systemic development of the country is the adolescent birth rate.
Right, I saw this.
It sits at a staggering 153.45 births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19.
Over 153 births per 1,000 teenage girls. That is massive. That means a huge percentage of the female population is becoming mothers while they are still legally and biologically children themselves. But then right next to this data on epidemic levels of teen pregnancy, the sources highlight a completely different metric under the empowerment category that it gave me mental whiplash.
Yes, the share of parliamentary seats held by women. In 1990, it was 25.2%. By 2023, women hold 43.2% of national parliamentary seats in Mozambique.
Okay, I have to stop and challenge this dichotomy because it's completely jarring.
It is.
You have a country where 43.2% of the national government is female. That far surpasses the global average of 26.54%. They have better female representation in their government than many highly developed Western nations.
Very true.
Yet, simultaneously, out in the real world, at the grassroots level, they are suffering from extreme maternal mortality and massive teen pregnancy rates. How do these two realities exist in the same country? If the women are writing the laws, why are the teenage girls dying in childbirth?
It highlights a severe, often misunderstood disconnect between top-down political reform and bottom-up structural reality.
How so?
Having 43% female representation in parliament is a massive, hard-won political victory. Often these numbers are achieved through mandatory political quotas or post-conflict government restructuring.
Right.
It's a beacon of progress at the elite level. But the data shows us what we call a generational block.
The generational block. Explain the mechanics of that for us. How does that work?
Think back to that shattered glass bridge of education we discussed, the whole draining kids out of school after 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
High teen pregnancy is the specific mechanism that explains a massive portion of that dropout rate for girls. When a 15-year-old girl becomes pregnant, she doesn't just face health risks, she is socially and physically pulled out of the education system.
Her formal schooling ends that day.
Exactly. Her skill level and her earning potential are permanently capped at an adolescent level.
So no matter how many women are sitting in the capital city writing progressive laws, if a teenage girl in a rural village is forced into motherhood before she even learns to read fluently, the cycle of equal poverty continues. The political power hasn't translated into paved roads to clinics or cultural shifts regarding early marriage.
Exactly. Political empowerment at the top has not yet managed to trickle down to physiological and educational empowerment at the rural grassroots level. And this brings us all the way back to the hook of our deep dive, the central mystery we started with.
The 76.5% female labor participation rate.
Right. We now have the puzzle pieces. We know these women are dropping out of school early, they're having children very young, and they are making very little money, only about $1,198 a year.
Right.
So the glaring question is, what exactly are 76.5% of the women doing every day? If they're working so hard, where is the output?
This is where we decode the labor illusion. And I think this is where a lot of our Western biases blind us.
Absolutely.
When we hear the phrase labor participation, our minds immediately go to formal employment. We picture someone waking up, commuting to an office, or working a shift in a regulated factory, getting a biweekly paycheck, paying income taxes, maybe contributing to a pension or a retirement fund.
Right, that is wealth-generating labor. It is highly structured, legally protected, and scales with experience.
But in statistical terms, labor participation doesn't mean you have a 401k. It simply means you are engaged in an economic activity to survive.
And for the vast majority of that 76.5% of Mozambican women, this means working in the low-skill, informal sector.
What does that look like on the ground?
We are talking about intense, back-breaking subsistence agriculture, waking up before dawn to walk miles to fetch water, tending to small plots of land just to feed their immediate family.
Wow.
It means sitting in the heat and dust of unregulated local markets, selling a few vegetables or handmade goods with profit margins of literal pennies just to buy enough cornmeal for that evening's dinner.
It is pure survival labor.
Exactly. It's high physical expenditure with incredibly low economic yield. There is no sick leave. There is no upward mobility.
You just work to eat that day.
Right. If it rains too much, your crops die and you have no income. If you get sick, your market stall sits empty and you don't eat.
It's like trying to bail out a sinking boat with a thimble. You are exerting maximum physical energy, your arms are burning, you're sweating, you're working incredibly hard. But the tool you have, which is your lack of formal education and capital, is so inadequate that you aren't actually making progress.
That's a perfect analogy.
You aren't accumulating wealth. You're just frantically surviving the day so you don't drown.
And because they fell through that glass bridge of education at age 10 or 12, they lack the specialized skills, literacy, accounting, technical trades required to put down the thimble, step out of the informal sector, and enter the formal, high-yield economy.
It really forces you to reflect on our own cultural narratives.
Yeah.
We have this pervasive myth that if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work hard enough, you will inevitably escape poverty. But this data absolutely destroys that myth. It proves that without systemic support, without an education system that retains you, healthcare that protects you, and formal markets that reward your skills, sheer brute force hard work alone cannot defeat poverty.
That is the tragic reality of the labor paradox. Hard work is necessary, but without infrastructure, it is not sufficient.
Right.
And the daily reality of that labor gets even more difficult to bear when we look at the environment these women are returning to after a 14-hour day of survival labor. This brings us to a concept known as the hidden tax of multidimensional poverty.
Right, because income, the $11,198 a year is only one single dimension of poverty. Having a few dollars in your pocket doesn't mean much if the environment around you is actively hostile to your health. What else is dragging down the daily reality of these workers?
The data provides a brilliant metric for this called the Inequality-Adjusted HDI, or IHDI.
Yeah.
This index takes the country's overall human development score and actively penalizes it based on how unevenly those gains are distributed across the population.
Makes sense.
Mozambique's absolute HDI, as we established early on, is 0.493. But when you adjust for inequality, it plummets to 0.297.
It drops from 0.493 to 0.297. That is a brutal, nearly 40% loss, 39.757%, according to the report of Human Development, purely due to uneven distribution.
Yes, a near 40% loss. And the breakdown of where that loss occurs is critical. They lose about 34.3% of their development potential due to inequality in education and a massive 54.4% loss due to extreme income inequality.
So even the tiny sliver of wealth and education that does exist in the country is highly concentrated in the hands of a few, likely in the urban centers, leaving the vast majority of the rural population completely behind.
Exactly.
And this leads directly into the Multidimensional Poverty Index, the MPI.
The MPI is perhaps the most visceral, humanizing data point we have in the entire sweep of research. It looks beyond money to measure acute deprivations in health, education, and living standards.
It looks at the actual physical conditions of life.
Exactly. In Mozambique, 60.7% of the population lives in multidimensional poverty.
Over 6 out of every 10 people. And the sources break down exactly what makes up that poverty burden. And it's not just an abstract concept. They measure the specific deprivations.
They do. And the biggest negative asset, the largest single contributor to their poverty, is a lack of education. It makes up a massive 33.2% of the poverty burden.
This ties perfectly back to our shattered glass bridge. The lack of schooling is the heaviest weight around their necks.
Yes. Following education, poor nutrition accounts for 15.2% of the burden.
So they are uneducated and they are physically undernourished, which saps the energy needed for that survival labor. But then you get into the actual living standards, the homes they return to.
Yes. Lack of safe cooking fuel contributes 10% to the poverty burden, and inadequate housing contributes 9.3%.
I want to focus on that cooking fuel statistic because it might sound trivial to someone in a developed nation, but it is profoundly destructive.
Oh, it really is.
When we say lack of safe cooking fuel, we mean they don't have natural gas or electricity. They are cooking over open fires using gathered wood or biomass, and who is spending 4 hours a day walking miles to gather that heavy wood, the women and girls,
Right.
and who is standing over the fire, inhaling toxic smoke in an unventilated mud home, the women and children. That smoke causes chronic respiratory diseases, which damages their health, which prevents them from working, which keeps them poor.
This raises an important question. How do you possibly build a modern, formal, thriving economy when 60% of your citizens lack not just money, but basic caloric nutrition, safe ways to cook their food without destroying their lungs, and a solid roof over their heads?
You can't.
It's impossible. Inequality and multidimensional poverty act as a literal 40% tax on the entire nation's overall progress. Every time they try to take a step forward, the sheer physical weight of these basic deprivations drags them back.
And that detail about cooking fuels burning wood and biomass provides a really crucial and ironic pivot to our final data set. Because when we talk about how a population lives, how they cook, and how they consume energy to survive, we're talking about their interaction with the global environment.
Yes, we have to look at planetary pressures. Every nation's development model interacts with the planet, usually through carbon emissions, fossil fuel consumption, and resource extraction.
Right. Historically, the richer a country gets, the more it pollutes.
The dataset provides a metric called the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, or PHDI. This takes a country's development score and penalizes it based on its carbon dioxide emissions and material footprint.
Okay.
When we look at the global average, planetary pressures cause a massive 10.05% loss in human development value. Developed nations, the US, Europe, China, are heavily penalized mathematically for their massive pollution output.
But Mozambique's PHDI loss is a minuscule 1.42%. Their per capita CO2 emissions are an almost negligible 0.237 tons.
So, on paper, if you just look at the spreadsheet, Mozambique looks like an environmental utopia. They look like they have figured out the secret to perfectly green, sustainable living.
Statistically, yes. But we must be very careful not to romanticize this. This is not proactive environmentalism.
No, not at all.
This is not a society that is heavily invested in massive solar grids, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. This tiny carbon footprint is the direct, unavoidable result of severe, multidimensional poverty and a total lack of industrialization.
Exactly. It's involuntary minimalism. You don't have a carbon footprint because you literally don't have electricity to turn on a light bulb.
Right. You don't emit exhaust because you don't own a car to drive. You aren't polluting through manufacturing because there are no formal factories to work in. It's green by necessity, not by choice.
And this frames the ultimate looming future challenge for Mozambique and really the entire developing world in the 21st century.
Like that.
As they attempt to fix that broken education system, as they try to transition that massive 76.5% female workforce off the informal survival treadmill and into formal wealth-generating industries, and as they try to raise that $1,356 annual income, how do they industrialize and grow without adopting the destructive carbon-heavy habits of the developed world?
They essentially have to leapfrog the dirty industrial revolution entirely.
Yeah.
They have to build a modern economy from scratch without relying on the cheap fossil fuels that the West used to get rich. It's a staggering, almost unfair challenge.
It really is.
So what does this all mean? We've journeyed through over 30 years of complex, sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes incredibly inspiring data. Let's bring it all together for the listener. What is the ultimate summary of the light and the pain in Mozambique's human development story?
The light in the data is undeniable. We see a highly resilient 76.5% female labor participation rate, which proves an immense, untapped cultural willingness to work.
Right.
We see a highly progressive 43.2% female parliamentary representation, showing an openness to political empowerment. And we see the ultimate demographic miracle, a nearly 20-year leap in life expectancy since 1990. They have survived, and they have grown.
But the pain is the deep structural trap holding all that potential back. 60.7% of the country lives in severe multidimensional poverty, dealing with toxic cooking smoke and malnutrition. There are extreme systemic adolescent birth rates that are physically cutting girls' futures short. And there is that devastating 6-year deficit between the education children are expected to get and the reality of dropping out before they can truly learn.
Based on everything we've synthesized from the data, distilling this down into a strategic path forward reveals three vital, interconnected interventions for Mozambique's future.
Okay, what's step one?
First, precision education intervention. The government must fix that 6.2-year gap. It's no longer about just building more primary schools. It is about creating targeted social and economic incentives like cash transfers or free meals to keep girls in school past puberty. They must repair the glass bridge.
Second is health capital investment.
Yes. Lowering the maternal mortality rate and the teen pregnancy rate is the only way to break the generational block. When girls have access to reproductive health care and can control their own timelines, they stay in school longer, they acquire specialized skills, and they can finally transform that incredible 76.5% labor rate from low-yield survival tasks into formal, high-efficiency economic growth.
And the third major takeaway is inequality governance.
Mitigating that brutal 54.4% loss caused by income inequality is paramount. You simply cannot grow an economy sustainably or maintain social stability when the wealth is hoarded so tightly at the top, while 60% of the population lacks basic cooking fuel and daily nutrition.
Right.
Distributing the economic gains outward to the rural areas is the fastest way to accelerate national human development.
We spend so much time measuring human progress through sterile graphs and decimal points, expected years of schooling, GNI per capita, HDI values. It's easy to get lost in the math.
Very easy.
But the story of Mozambique proves that the most abundant, powerful natural resource a country has isn't buried in the ground. It is the sheer resilient willpower of its people.
Absolutely.
That 76.5% labor participation rate is a breathtaking testament to human endurance. If hard work alone were currency, Mozambique would be one of the richest nations on earth.
It really would.
It leaves you with a lingering thought. Well, not just about them, but about us. In our own lives, in our own careers, and in our own societies, how much of our true potential is lost simply because we don't have the right systems in place to catch, nurture, and reward our effort.